how does an ongoing geopolitical crisis in Iran suddenly make a microscopic virus in the Congo exponentially more deadly?
I mean, it sounds like a movie plot, right?
It really does. But, that is exactly the question we are unraveling today. We are looking at a $3.6 billion catastrophe that is unfolding right now, and it completely defies the neat, clean categories we usually try to put global events into.
Yeah, absolutely.
Welcome to today's deep dive. I am so glad you are joining us for this because we are looking at a really fascinating piece of reporting today. It's a June 30, 2026 article by Sandra Mejia titled, Ebola Outbreak Could Cost Africa Up to $3.60, UN Warns.
And, that title definitely captures the financial shock.
Hmm.
But the underlying mechanisms driving that massive number, that's what we really need to dissect here.
Right.
We're looking at a situation where epidemiology, global energy markets, local armed conflict, and, believe it or not, constitutional politics are all they're colliding in real time.
And our mission for you today in this deep dive is to explore exactly how those pieces fit together. Like how a single biological event in one very specific corner of the globe is creating this massive, unstoppable ripple effect.
Mm-hmm.
To understand the scale of what we are dealing with, we need to establish the baseline of how fast this is actually moving, because the official timeline here is incredibly compressed, isn't it?
Oh, it's incredibly fast.
Yeah.
So the initial declaration happened on May 15th. The outbreak was officially recognized in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the DRC, and in neighboring Uganda.
Okay, May 15.
Right. But what makes this timeline really stand out is the response of the World Health Organization. Just 2 days later, on May 17th, they elevated this to a public health emergency of international concern.
Which is huge.
It's massive. I mean, international bureaucracies usually move at a glacial pace, right?
Yes.
They require weeks of committee meetings and reports.
Yeah, lots of red tape.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So a 2-day turnaround that indicates an immediate, undeniable recognition that the standard containment protocols were they were not going to be enough.
Which tells you a lot about the panic level behind closed doors. But to really grasp that staggering $3.6 billion price tag the UN is warning about, we first have to look at the biology of the virus itself.
We do.
Because the health workers stepping into the situation, they're essentially fighting with one hand tied behind their backs, biologically speaking.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Let's lay out the data from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Okay.
By June 22, the CDC classified this as the third largest Ebola outbreak on record.
Wow. Already.
And the government figures cited by the UN Development Program, they show 3,307 people infected and 377 dead in the DRC alone.
Just in the DRC.
Just there. And those numbers are compounding rapidly because of the specific biology at play. See, we are dealing with the Bundibugyo species of the virus.
Right, Bundibugyo.
Yeah, and most of the recent global attention, and therefore the medical research funding, has been focused on the Zaire strain.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I want to make sure we are really picturing what's happening on a cellular level. The world has seen Ebola outbreaks recently, and we have heard about vaccines being deployed successfully. So, why are we back at square one here?
It basically comes down to viral surface proteins.
Okay.
Vaccines work by introducing your immune system to the specific shape of a virus's outer shell, its glycoproteins.
So it's like a memory test for the immune system.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So your body can produce antibodies that fit that shape perfectly, like a key in a lock. But the Bundibugyo strain has a different structural shape than the Zaire strain.
Ah, so the key doesn't fit?
The key doesn't fit at all. The antibodies generated by the existing Zaire vaccine simply do not bind electively to the Bundibugyo virus.
Got it.
So while the WHO is fast-tracking new candidates for testing, the current medical toolkit for an active infection is virtually empty. There is no licensed vaccine. There is no targeted antiviral treatment.
Man, so fighting this specific Bundibugyo strain without a vaccine or a targeted treatment, it is essentially like firefighters showing up to a massive forest fire and realizing they do not have any water.
That's exactly what it's like.
They can't extinguish the flames directly. They have to rely entirely on just digging trenches, clearing brush, and, hoping the wind doesn't shift. It is a purely defensive game of containment.
And without a pharmaceutical intervention, that containment requires flawless infection control. And they're trying to do this in an environment where flawless is nearly impossible.
Right, because of how it spreads.
Exactly. The disease spreads through direct contact with infected bodily fluids. That means transmission happens during the most intimate, vulnerable moments of human life.
Like taking care of your family.
Yes. Caring for a sick child, or preparing a loved one's body for burial. When a highly lethal virus exploits the basic human instinct to care for the sick and mourn the dead, and you have no vaccine to create a biological firewall around those caregivers, the mathematics of the spread become exponential very quickly.
And that biological vulnerability, that is the exact mechanism driving this from a localized health issue into a macroeconomic catastrophe.
Hmm.
Because we are not just talking about a medical emergency anymore. We are looking at the terrifying economic projections laid out by the UN.
Yeah, the numbers are grim.
Mhm.
Damian Mama, who is the UN Development Program's representative in the DRC, he framed this very clearly.
What did he say?
He warned that without an immediate massive influx of resources to force containment, this will mutate from a health emergency into a prolonged development crisis.
Wow.
And the UNDP modeled out a few scenarios to quantify what that actually looks like.
Uh-huh.
In their best case scenario, which, by the way, assumes the epidemic is successfully confined largely to the DRC and Uganda, the economic damage to Congo's GDP alone is projected to be around $1 billion.
Here's where it gets really interesting. I am looking at that baseline. $1 billion is a massive hit for the DRC's economy. But how do we leap from a localized $1 billion hit to this headline-grabbing worst-case scenario of a $3.6 billion cut to the continental GDP?
It's a huge jump.
Right. And the article also mentions the potential loss of 328,000 jobs. I have a hard time believing that jump is purely just from the virus crossing a few more borders. There has to be a multiplier effect happening in the math here.
You're totally right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the math starts to make a grain kind of sense. The $3.6 billion figure represents a compound crisis.
Okay.
The worst-case model does assume the virus breaches borders into countries like Rwanda and Angola, but the truly devastating economic multiplier is that this biological shock is colliding with a massive external macroeconomic pressure.
The Iran situation.
Exactly. The report explicitly links this to the ongoing Iran crisis, which has triggered severe spikes in global fuel prices.
I want to break down the mechanics of that because on the surface, a geopolitical standoff in the Middle East seems, well, entirely disconnected from a viral outbreak in Central Africa.
It really does seem unrelated at first glance.
But it comes down to supply chains and infrastructure, doesn't it? An Ebola response relies heavily on fuel.
It relies on it entirely. Think about the logistics of a public health intervention in a really remote region. You need a cold chain.
Generators running nonstop.
Right. Generators running 247 on diesel to keep potential vaccine candidates and testing reagents at the exact right temperature. You need fleets of off-road vehicles for contact tracers. You need helicopters and transport planes to move hazardous medical waste and protective equipment.
Man, that's a lot of fuel.
It's a massive amount. So when global fuel prices spike because of tensions in Iran, the cost of operating that logistical network just skyrockets.
So these countries are already paying a premium just to keep their basic infrastructure running, like keeping the lights on, keeping agricultural trucks moving. And right at that exact moment of extreme financial vulnerability, they are hit with an Ebola outbreak that forces them to shut down trade, close their markets, and redirect their already stretched budgets toward emergency health spending that is now twice as expensive to execute.
Yeah, that compounding pressure creates a sort of economic singularity. Africa's CDC and the WHO estimate the direct health spending needed to tackle this outbreak is $518 million.
$500 million.
Right. But when you factor in the wider humanitarian needs created by the disruption, the food insecurity when markets close, the loss of livelihoods, that number climbs to $1.4 billion.
Wow.
And those 328,000 lost jobs mentioned in the report, they aren't necessarily people falling ill. They are the collateral damage of informal economies freezing up because movement is restricted and transportation costs have just become prohibitive.
The international community is being asked to find $1.4 billion, and the DRC's government has announced a $319 million response plan domestically. But here is the stark reality that Sandra Majia's reporting exposes.
Yeah.
You could drop $1 billion in cash into the center of this outbreak, and it honestly wouldn't stop the virus if the environment on the ground is actively hostile to the intervention.
And unfortunately, it is hostile. The transmission in the DRC is heavily concentrated in the eastern provinces, specifically Ituri, North Kivu, and South Kivu.
And those areas are already struggling.
Deeply. These regions have suffered through years of intense armed conflict. You have multiple armed groups operating in the area, leading to mass displacement of civilians and chronic insecurity.
It is an active war zone, and trying to execute a textbook epidemiological response in a war zone fundamentally changes the nature of the crisis.
It completely breaks the textbook.
Hmm.
The chronic instability has eroded the existing health infrastructure to the breaking point.
Yeah.
Humanitarian agencies are reporting that bed occupancy in treatment centers has reached 95%.
95%.
Yeah. And in epidemiology, a 95% occupancy rate doesn't mean you have a little bit of room left.
Right.
It means the system is effectively paralyzed. There is no slack to safely isolate the influx of newly sick patients, which means highly infectious individuals are being turned away to be cared for at home.
Which just creates a vicious cycle of new infections. And that leads to one of the most striking statistics in the entire article. Africa CDC chief Jean Kaseya reported that nearly 300 people who have actually tested positive for Ebola are currently unaccounted for.
Yeah, that number is terrifying.
They are simply missing in these eastern provinces because armed groups control the territory, making it impossible for health workers to go in and track them down.
Because the entire foundation of stopping an Ebola outbreak is contact tracing.
Right.
You find the sick person, you identify every single human they have interacted with, and you monitor those contacts for 21 days. But when you have 300 confirmed positive cases vanish into a conflict zone, the mathematical tree of transmission becomes invisible.
They just disappear into the crowd.
Exactly. Each of those individuals is likely interacting with family members, or they're seeking alternative care in unregulated clinics, or they're simply moving to a new area to survive the conflict, and they're spreading the virus deeper into the community.
So what does this all mean for the health workers? Trying to do contact tracing in that environment is like trying to track sparks in a dry forest, while the forest itself is actively fighting the firefighters. The basic tools of public health, data collection, patient isolation, continuous monitoring, they are completely neutralized by the security environment.
It introduces a profound fog of war to the outbreak. The virus is moving through the population, but the data is completely opaque. And this total lack of control at the local level is now exacerbating some very intense political friction at the national level in the DRC.
And we see this pattern constantly, right? A crisis of this magnitude inevitably becomes intertwined with domestic politics.
Always.
President Felix Tshisekedi made a televised address recently where he announced that $319 million response plan. He also made a very direct plea to the public, stating, "Ebola is neither a rumor nor a source of shame." He was urging people to actually come forward to health centers if they have symptoms, rather than hiding or turning to traditional healers.
And the messaging from the president there is standard public health communication. You need to destigmatize the disease to encourage early treatment, which improves survival rates and limits community spread.
Sure.
However, the secondary actions the government took alongside that message are what ignited the current controversy.
The bans.
Yes. The government instituted widespread bans on public gatherings across several provinces. And the critical detail here is that some of the provinces targeted by these bans have 0 confirmed cases of Ebola.
Which immediately changes how the public interprets the mandate. Now, to be clear, for you listening, we are looking at the tension detailed in the source material because it perfectly illustrates how health mandates and political agendas can completely blur together in the middle of a crisis. We are absolutely not taking sides here, just reporting what the article highlights about the tension. But the opposition figures in the DRC are aggressively pushing back against the government's official public health explanation.
Right. The opposition claims these bans on public gatherings have nothing to do with infection control. They argue the bans are a convenient, politically motivated pretext designed specifically to prevent planned public protests.
Protests about what?
They were organizing against proposed changes to the Constitution.
Wow. Okay, put yourself in the shoes of a citizen in one of those provinces. You are being told you cannot gather in public because of a virus that hasn't even reached your town right when you were planning to protest the government.
Exactly.
Whether the government's intentions are purely epidemiological or purely political almost doesn't matter at that point because the trust is broken. If a doctor in a hazmat suit shows up a week later asking you to hand over your sick child to an isolation ward, that underlying political mistrust makes the doctor's job almost impossible.
Because public health requires public consent.
Right.
When a population views a health mandate as a weapon of political suppression, compliance collapses.
Yeah.
And the virus exploits that fracture in trust instantly.
It's the perfect storm.
It really is. This profound lack of local control, combined with the shattered community trust and the ongoing armed conflict, creates the perfect environment for the virus to move regionally.
Let's look at the geography of where this trust is breaking down, because Ituri province isn't just an isolated pocket of the country. It borders both Uganda and South Sudan.
And geography is a massive variable here. Ituri sits directly on major bustling trade routes. It is a hub for active mining operations, which naturally draw transient
Oh,
labor,
lots of movement.
constant movement, and it contains established pathways for displaced people moving to escape the militia violence.
Okay.
So you have a highly fluid, constant movement of people and goods across porous borders. And the virus travels along those exact same economic and survival pathways.
And we are seeing the data reflect that movement right now. Uganda's not just dealing with a few isolated imported cases anymore. The article notes they have 20 confirmed cases and 2 deaths by late June. And the critical data point is that while most of those initial cases were linked to travel from the DRC, 5 of them were associated with local transmission inside Uganda. The virus is no longer just visiting, it has set up shop across the border.
And that transition from imported cases to local transmission is what elevates the threat level globally. The WHO now ranks the risk level in the DRC as very high and Uganda as high.
Very high.
Yeah. And the modeling study published in the Lancet Infectious Diseases provides a really sobering timeline. They project that if this specific chain of transmission isn't broken, the region could see thousands of cases by mid-September.
Thousands.
Thousands. The model also flags a high probability of the virus moving north into South Sudan, a country whose health infrastructure is even more fragile due to its own protracted conflicts.
Okay, I'm looking at this progression, a highly lethal virus moving rapidly along trade routes and border crossings into neighboring countries, and my immediate logical reaction is to shut it down.
Sure, that's the instinct.
Right. Close the borders. Halt the cross-border trade. Stop the travel completely until the fire is out. Yet the World Health Organization is actively advising against travel and trade restrictions on the DRC and Uganda. Why keep the doors open when the threat is actively spilling out of the house?
This raises an important question about the counterintuitive logic of global health policy. Closing a border feels decisive and protective to a domestic population, sure.
Yeah, it feels safe.
But epidemiologically, it often backfires disastrously for 2 very practical reasons. First, a severe border closure economically strangles the affected country, which immediately disrupts the logistical supply chains we discussed earlier.
The fuel and the aid.
Exactly. You need borders open to fly in the diesel fuel, the medical supplies, the food aid, and the international experts required to actually fight the outbreak at its source.
So if you close the border, you are essentially blockading the very firefighters you are sending in to stop the fire.
Precisely. And the second reason is about human behavior and government incentives. Punitive border closures discourage transparency.
Also.
Well, if a nation knows that reporting a novel outbreak will instantly result in economic isolation and trade embargoes from its neighbors, the political incentive is to delay reporting.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
They hide it.
They hide it. Governments might hide the data or attempt to handle it quietly until the outbreak is too large to conceal. The WHO advises keeping borders open to maintain the flow of crucial aid and to incentivize total transparency. You cannot fight a virus if the data is being hidden from you.
That requires a massive amount of restraint from neighboring countries to keep those borders open when their own populations are terrified.
It really does.
But it points back to a fundamental truth about fighting an outbreak. There is a moment in the article where the WHO Director General, Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, is visiting Bunia, the center of the response in the eastern DRC. He addresses exactly what the most vital tool in this entire fight actually is, and it is not a border wall, and it's not even that $1.4 billion fund.
No, it's not. He identified community trust and safe burials as the absolute core of the response. He stated that without trust, slowing the virus is nearly impossible.
Wow.
You can have $1 billion in funding, open borders, and perfect supply chains. But if a family does not trust the medical workers enough to let them safely manage the burial of a loved one, the transmission chain continues unbroken. The true weapon against this pathogen isn't purely medical, it is behavioral. And human behavior in a crisis is entirely dictated by trust.
Which brings us full circle on today's deep dive. We started by looking at how a microscopic virus in the Congo is creating a $3.6 billion global ripple effect. And what this source material demonstrates so clearly is how deeply, intricately connected our world actually is.
It's all tied together.
Exactly. The global economic stability that dictates the price of fuel you pay, driven by geopolitical tensions in Iran, can directly cripple an emergency medical response in Central Africa. And the ability of that virus to destroy regional economies ultimately hinges on local armed conflict and a basic lack of community trust in a mining town in the eastern DRC. It is not just a medical story. It is a profound lesson in global fragility.
It really leaves us with a stark reality to consider. I mean, in an era of unprecedented technological advancement and global wealth, it is fascinating that our ultimate defense against a catastrophic economic and biological crisis isn't always a high-tech vaccine or a billion-dollar UN emergency fund.
Right.
The strongest barrier we have is the fragile, easily broken bond of trust between a local community and its institutions. The ultimate challenge isn't just funding the response. It is figuring out how we even begin to stockpile trust before the next crisis hits.
That is the real diagnostic challenge we are left with. We keep looking for a clean, precise solution to these global emergencies, but what we actually have to navigate is the messy, complicated, and entirely unpredictable human element. It is a lot to think about. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive today. We really appreciate you exploring this complex web with us, and we will catch you on the next one.